Thanks for joining us on Chamber Business News. You're watching Request to Speak. This is the best web-based Arizona politics talk show, so congratulations to our panelists for being on today. We've got two guests to talk about the hot issues of today. The famous Sophie Z, Sophie O'Keefe-Zellman from OH Strategic Communications. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And the big mocker at Marson Media, Barrett Marson. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for having me on. First time, long time.
All right. We got three segments today. Segment one, delete your account. Off camera, we were talking about the state of journalism today. One of the things that has troubled me is the issue of reporters tweeting, but they are tweeting their own personal opinions, and yet they're objective reporters. Should I care about this, or am I just in the distinct minority? Sophie, what do you think?
All right, so my gut reaction to this is of course not. You know, we think about journalism with this holier than thou profession, independent, free and independent media. But then I was thinking about it, and in today's day and age, everyone has biases, right? No matter what. Journalists, they must have biases. So is it better to know what their biases are, and then it allows us to better fact check or to better evaluate their stories? And so I'm going to err that I do think they shouldn't be sharing their personal opinion. But then in today's day and age, maybe it's better to know what our biases are, because when we go home at night, we all have our own thoughts and opinions.
Barrett, you're a former newspaper scribe. You are of a certain vintage. Your career predates Twitter. What do you think about this?
You know, I used to be on the Journalist Roundtable on Horizon. Always fun, but always something that Howie and I and other people would think about, or we've got to keep our opinions in check. I remember the one time I let that go a little bit. Former legislator Colette Rosati had sent out a truly embarrassing mailer against Michelle Reagan and another opponent who's, I think, Royce Flora, if I'm not mistaken, talking about how they weren't family people. One didn't have a kid, and one was married without a kid, and all that stuff. So, and I lambasted her for that. And after the show, I thought I went a little too far in my personal opinion on the show, because I was a little harsh on her. It was even more embarrassing when I went to go work for the House a short time later, and she was a member there. But thankfully, I don't think she watched a lot of PBS. So, but I always tried to keep my opinions, my feelings in check, and not talk about what I thought about what a governor or the legislature had done. I think that's important. Today, it's not as important. I mean, a lot of newspaper reporters, a lot of TV reporters are not shy in expressing their opinion. And look, their retweets aren't endorsements. But, you know, look at their retweets and you see the patterns. So I think that is almost a bygone era of journalists not expressing their opinions, certainly on social media.
Sophie, I was thinking about your point about bias, and you're right. The folks who write these articles, they're not robots, right? They have opinions. But am I just longing for a time gone by where I at least had the facade, the appearance of impartiality?
I think one issue I think that we, hopefully reporters can keep that. It's one thing, I guess, to tweet about, and show a little bit of your opinion in tweets, but how does the story come out? Again, I'll go back to, say, Howie Fisher, who is quite the pisser when you actually deal with him face to face. But then when you read his article, it
pretty much right down the middle.
Right.
Comes right down the middle. That's fine. And so, and he's very snarky, and he tweets snarkily and all that. But for the mass audience that he writes for, dwindling audience, whichever one you want to use, I see that down the middle. I think that's important. That is a good model. Not all reporters hew to that.
And I think a lot of it is just competition for touch points and communication with audiences. Like, there's such a drive to constantly be communicating, whether it's sharing your personal, what are you doing on a Sunday? You see a lot of reporters sharing their daily lives, whether it's, a tweet. We're not just communicating with readers through stories. There's a race to get your Facebook updates, race to get your Twitter updates, your best Instagram. And if you're communicating 24/7, it's got to become harder, especially if you're trying to personalize yourself to an audience and endear a following, to put those away, because they're right, otherwise you're just a constant robot. And what are you going to say? Today's weather is sunny.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
I think, I tweet because I enjoy it. I would hate to tweet because I'm looked at my analytics and how many
your corporate overlords were telling you to do that.
Absolutely, but I mean, and I'm graded, or my pay raise if there ever is one, is dependent upon
Right.
how many likes, how many shares, how many retweets. So I think that's a big difference as well. I mean, you have to be a little provocative to bring readers in, because the paper isn't just the only thing now. It is the eyeballs on the screen.
Right, but Sophie, what I'm thinking about is these provocative tweets that Barrett mentioned, though. How do you reconcile that with the constant begging from reporters on Twitter to support your local newspaper? Don't forget to subscribe, which is, I don't want to subscribe to your opinion, and I want to read a good opinion page, but I don't know that I necessarily want to read objective reporters' opinions. Again, am I just a crank? Get off my lawn?
Kind of sounds like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's fair. Fair.
I think things are evolving, and I think journalism as an industry needs to look at its standards and its ethics in terms of its communication and its standards of how often people are required to use these different platforms. But I do also think there's a lot of confusion that exists between opinion pages and reporters, and that's created some of the fury when people get so mad about a paper taking a stand, and you're like, that was the opinion page. But as we get further and further away from people actually reading a physical paper, it's harder for people to understand that.
Yeah. All right, we're going to get off this topic. Segment 2, to infinity and beyond. Is the Democrat primary for the special election next year? Yeah, it is next year. Is that settled? Is it going to be Mark Kelly as the Democratic nominee, or do we not know? We'll start with Barrett.
I think a little bit is going to depend on what happens in a couple of weeks in the Phoenix mayoral race. Kate Gallego pulls up a big win. Maybe Ruben Gallego becomes a bit more emboldened. And
You're saying because the name ID alone is
not
elevated?
just the name. I've heard the Gallegos haven't lost an election, if you will.
Okay.
So I think that would be that desire. I'll tell you, having a primary, Senate primary between Mark Kelly and Ruben Gallego would be a pretty incredible race.
It's a thrill in Manila.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought we had a good race, at least an exciting race between Martha McSally and Kirsten Sinema. And I think that sort of excitement would be in the Democratic primary, and it would be wild and a little brutal, I'm sure, but it would be fun to watch.
Is astronaut Mark Kelly going to be the Democratic nominee for the special election in 2020?
I think it's still really early, and I think what we saw coming out of 2018 is there's a progressive base in Arizona that's emerging and is very energized, and I think they're going to be wanting more in a primary, and I think there's also some concern that maybe Mark Kelly becomes a single issue candidate. And so I think if someone like a Gallego gets in the race who's far more progressive, I think it's kind of up in the air because primaries do bring out the base. And like you were saying, you can't count out a Gallego. They're tenacious campaigners.
I think the progressive base held their fire last year for Kirsten Sinema. They weren't, she's not the most progressive liberal, at least the way she has voted in the past few years, and even her voting record now. So I think they held their fire a little bit. I don't know that they want to do that 2 straight elections in a row. So I think there's room.
The purity test might get a little tougher in the next
There
primary?
is room, I think, for a more progressive candidate than a former, someone who was a Republican just a short time ago who voted for Ted Cruz. And so I think there's going to be room for that in the Democratic primary this year.
Sophie, here's what I'm wondering about is Mark Kelly's resume is extremely impressive, but he doesn't really have a political base to count on, at least not in Arizona. Now he's got the brand of the single issue, sensible gun solutions. That seems like an issue that he could perhaps launch a candidacy on, but in Arizona politics, how does he get going here?
Well, and I think in some ways that might make him stand out in Arizona politics because we always like
a fresh face, maybe?
fresh face. We like an outsider. We like an independent person, and he's been in Arizona a long time now, and he's been by former Congressman Gifford's side for many years, and with her through a lot. And I think her supporters and her broad following is probably gonna step in line with him.
And Garrick, money changes everything, and
Raised a lot of money.
within 24 hours he raised seven-figure haul. So he may not have a political base, if you will,
But you can
he's
buy
got yeah. He's going a long way to buy that base.
Would you rather have the Kelly brand or the Gallego left of center bona fides?
Well, in a Democratic primary,
Yeah.
for sure, I think I'd rather be Ruben Gallego because I think that he speaks to the voter base here. He's been on CNN how many times talking about Donald Trump and how bad he is for the country and those types of issues. So I think he would do well in a primary. General election's a different story.
What do you think, Sophie? Who would you rather be in a Democratic primary? Would you rather be Gallego or Kelly?
I mean, I think Gallego has a little bit of a home field advantage. He's got an infrastructure in place. And I think, like we were talking about, a primary brings out the base. And he is more in alignment with the base and with kind of these emerging new voters that we've seen in the last couple elections. But again, he'll have to make a pivot in the general.
All right, stay tuned. All right, last segment, read it, watch it, listen to it. Our panelists are going to make some recommendations. What's on your mind? You're reading something, you're watching something, you're listening to something you think that our viewers should be tuned into?
Yes.
All right.
So I recently saw a 26 minutes, so it's very short, documentary called Groundwater on the Groundwater Management Act of 1980. And it was, I know, but wait for it, it gets better.
Gets better.
Because it had these great interviews with Governor Babbitt and Senator Kyle and Kathleen Ferris about just all the people and all the different factions across the state that had to come together to make Arizona a model in the nation for water management. And just kind of as a backdrop of what we just went through with the contingency plan, it's kind of good to reflect on our history, and it's kind of nice when you see Arizona doing something well. And water is something that we've historically done well. And I also think that there's so many of us that are new to the Valley, new-ish, that kind of institutional knowledge of history is really important, and there's a lot of lessons. And again, it's only 26 minutes.
How can our viewers find it?
You can find it on YouTube and iTunes, and if you just Google it, it comes up. And I swear I'm not being paid to hawk it. I just saw it recently, and I really enjoyed it.
SOZ, thank you very much. Barrett, what's your recommendation this week?
I read an opus this week from Casey Newton, former Arizona Republic reporter, who now works for a tech magazine in the Bay Area. He found something, an incredible slice of life here in Phoenix, as a matter of fact. Facebook, which hires a private company to screen videos and content on its platform to decide if it violates its community standards. Fascinating read. It's quite a long read, but it was well worth sticking with it. Talked to a lot of current and former employees who talk about the difficulties of the job of watching very painful videos, racist videos, violent videos, conspiracy theories, and how, all right, these violate community standards, you've got to remove them. Someone's got to do that. They don't have an algorithm yet to do that yet. So someone's got to do it, and he finds these people and talks to them about the emotional toll it takes on their lives. It was an incredible read. Find it on, at least through his Twitter, Casey Newton.
Casey Newton, great. I'll give you guys a recommendation. This is an odd one, but this week on the opinion page, Phil Boaz, The Republic, he wrote a profile of Henry Winkler. Now, do you know who Henry Winkler is? Okay, see, that's good.
Nick at Night.
Yeah. Right. Barrett, meanwhile, saw all first runs. Right, exactly. He wrote a profile of Henry Winkler, and he's not a guy that you would think would show up on the opinion page, but Winkler's story it's a fascinating one. He is the offspring of Holocaust survivors, grew up in New York, not world's greatest upbringing, had a lot of struggles in school, and then launched this incredible Hollywood career, but he got typecast a lot and then became a producer, director, and then a children's book author, and now he's back on TV winning Emmys. It's a really interesting look at one of the more recognizable faces in Hollywood. It was nice to see Phil Boaz go into the profile piece, and you're wondering, what is this doing on the opinion page? But it was really well done. So you can go to AZ Central and look at a piece by Phil Boaz about Henry Winkler. All right, Sophie O'Keefe Zellman, Barrett Marson, thanks for doing this, guys.
Thanks you for having us.
All right, we'll see you next time.